Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. To be honest, I was gonna film a completely different video today, but I've just had this kind of overwhelming sense of restlessness lately, and I've been trying to figure out what that is and where it's coming from. And I have realized that it's because I think I've been living in the same place, and by same place I mean like same city, same country for the past almost 4 years. And prior to that, I had been moving around for about 12 years. I had not lived in a single location for longer than a year, almost for an entire 12-year period between the ages of 18 and 30 years old. So all of my 20s were spent moving. And I just wrote down on a piece of paper, double-sided, all the different times that I moved. And when I say moved, I mean moved to another country, another continent, or at least across the country. And if you don't know, I live in Canada, so when I say across the country, I mean like thousands of miles away. So I moved a total of 20 times. 20 times between the years of 2005 and 2017. I have never written it all down and realized that until literally today. And so I'm realizing that my sense of restlessness, obviously COVID, being inside all the time, is a really big part of it. But on top of that, I am just feeling like, what is happening with my life? Like, when is my next move? When is the next step? And really, we don't want to move. We love it where we are, but it's just really hard to kick those feelings of restlessness. So that brings me to today's video. I just want to create a series of videos. I don't think I could fit it all into one, where I discuss my journeys through the world and why and how I moved so many times, and the changes that created in me, for me, to shape the kind of person that I am today. Because I think that my personality and fundamentally who I am has been so shaped by the fact that I was moving around. I want to have a record of those stories. And so I'm doing this as much for myself as I am for anybody who might be interested in what the life of a 20-something person who felt constantly compelled to move around was like. And I just want to preface this by saying that I was not backpacking for 12 years. I was not wealthy and just being like, ooh, I think I'm gonna go to this country, or I think I'm gonna just jet across the continent to do this and that. No, it was constantly on a shoestring budget. I was constantly saving up money. All of my money was constantly going to traveling to get to my next destination. And when I say I was moving, I wasn't passing through places. I was going to places to live. So for me, living in a place was at least half a year. If I was there for at least half a year, I counted as living. And I had something to do there, like work or study, etc. So I tallied up all my moves, and even though I moved 20 times during this period, I actually only really lived in 6 different countries. Between 2005 and 2017, I lived in Ireland, Canada, Spain, Italy, Sweden, and France. Those are the 6 countries where I lived. So in this video, I'm gonna try and get through just a few of those places and kind of tell the story of why I wanted to go there, what I was doing there, and how the impact that living there had on me and my life. So if you feel like listening to that, go grab a tea or a coffee or some snacks and just sit back and listen. And I'm also gonna try and dig up a bunch of old photos that I can paste throughout this video so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Hey guys, Lucy from the future here. I just wanted to let you know that I'm actually only going to be getting through my trip to Ireland in this video. I was hoping to cover more originally, but it just took up so much time that I think I'm just going to keep this video about Ireland. I also realized after I shot the video that there were tons of things that I wish I had mentioned and I didn't. So you're gonna see future me spliced throughout this video, kind of filling in the gaps that past me left, because I really want to have a complete record of this story. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so when I was a teenager, back in the prehistoric times, in high school, I was really interested in Celtic mythology as a part of my general interest in spirituality and spiritual development. I've always been a very spiritual person, even though if you know me, I really don't talk about it that much. I think it's because it's such an inherent part of me, and it really started when I was a child, that I don't feel the need to like discuss it publicly, but I think it's important to contextualize why I made my first move. My first move was to Ireland when I was 18, when I finished high school. And the reason I went there is because I was really interested in the lore of Celtic mythology and fairies and like misty places and magic and all of that kind of stuff. In general, I had an interest in like the British Isles and Ireland, but I decided that Ireland was the place that I really wanted to go. And I ended up going to Galway, which is on the western coast of Ireland, and I lived there for about half a year. I saved up a bunch of money for a few months after high school, and I went completely by myself. So just to let you know, this was during the kind of early days of the European Union. So the country where I was born is called Slovakia, or the Slovak Republic. Well, back when I was born, it was called Czechoslovakia. It no longer exists. It's split into two. But anyway, Slovakia became a member of the European Union in 2004, I believe. I could be wrong. I think it's 2004. And at that time, I got a Slovakian passport, and that allowed me to have the ability to travel within Europe and live within Europe, because I am a dual citizen of both Canada and Slovakia. And when I was younger, I wasn't quite aware of all of the privileges that was affording me, but now looking back, I'm like so fortunate to be able to have access to two really powerful passports. And so even though the traveling that I did wasn't extravagant or anything like that, the only reason why it was possible was because I held these two passports. I just want you to know that I'm very aware of that, and I'm very fortunate. I recognize that I'm very privileged and fortunate to be able to have access to those documents. The first month I spent with a homestay family just outside of Galway because I wanted to get kind of more of an understanding for the local culture and meet some local people. My experience with the family was okay. They were all really nice to me, but they had some familial issues amongst themselves that made me really uncomfortable. I remember one time the homestay dad and mom were having a fight in their room, which was next to my room. They were fighting over the dad not wanting to share his whiskey with some family that were coming to visit, which sounds like a trivial thing, but actually they were really angry, and they were like throwing around the C word and the B word and the F word, and screaming, like literally screaming at each other for about half an hour. And then they were giving each other the silent treatment for the next few days, and this was not a huge house, so it was very awkward for me. And I didn't really form any very strong relationships living with that host family, but I did have a place to go to when I arrived in Ireland. So after I stayed with this host family, I moved out on my own. I found a room in a shared house closer to the center. So during that first period, when I arrived in Galway, Ireland, I went through a period of time that was very lonely. I wasn't really part of any programs or anything like that. So other than my host family, I didn't know anybody, and I just kind of spent that first, I would say, like month and a half to 2 months kind of exploring the city on my own and like trying to connect with the local landscape. So I would do these day trips out into the Irish countryside with like organized bus tours to go and visit places like Kylemore Abbey. As I mentioned before, I was really drawn to kind of like Celtic mythology and lore, even though I didn't really know that much about it. And during those first weeks and months in Galway, I would often visit the public library and just kind of like try to expand my mind by reading books. And I came across this book. Have you ever had that experience where you're kind of stuck and the perfect book comes into your life, like the exact book you need at that moment? That was this book. I found it randomly at the Galway Library, and it's called The Mist-Filled Path by Frank Mcewen. And the subtext is Celtic wisdom for exiles, wanderers, and seekers. And so he is an American, Scottish, Irish author, spiritual guy. I'm not quite sure what he's up to these days. What he talks a lot about in this book is kind of like personal transformation through creating a connection to nature. And he talks about how he did that, how he overcame like really debilitating illnesses by reconnecting to his spirit self, I guess. And one of the main topics in his book is kind of the idea of people who are asleep and awake. And I don't mean woke, like social justice woke. I mean people who are kind of just going through the motions of life versus people who are awakened to their really deep longing and desire and like their purpose in life, that they really feel pulled towards doing something. And I've always felt that way. So to read a book where somebody was actually talking about that and acknowledging it, and it was like, you know, he was like my best friend. So during that kind of lonely first period in Ireland, I was so happy to have this book. I read it cover to cover, and this isn't the actual copy that I found at the library. I got this like years later, more as kind of a memento to that period in my life rather than to like revisit the book again. That period of my life is when I needed it. I don't really need it so much anymore. It doesn't speak to me as much anymore. But anyway, I just thought to share that with you in case maybe you're looking for a good book that's non-dogmatic and really vulnerable and easy to read and just deals in general with kind of like spirituality, life stuff. This book is really good for that. And I also had, during that first period, a special place that I would go to in Ireland. And I had a couple of these special places where I would just go and sit and read or draw. The way that Galway is kind of built is that it has this huge river called the River Corrib. It runs right through the city. And at different points of the river, you have places, like grassy places to kind of sit down and just watch life go by. And there was one place that was really close to the house that I was renting a room in. And I don't really remember what it's called, but it's a part of the river. It's like this kind of like outdoor sports area, but on the other side of the river is this beautiful ruined castle, just kind of like overgrown with vines and super romantic looking, and there would always be horses grazing there. So I would always go down to the river and just watch the castle and kind of sit alone and just be in the place that I was and kind of like take in Ireland. And so once I moved out of my homestay family's home after the first month, I began looking for work. And the first job that I had, for which I thought I was gonna get paid, but actually I didn't get paid. I only worked it for 2 days. And at the beginning, it seemed like a dream job. I love horses, and I have ridden horses for several years. So my first job was at a horseback riding center right on the beach, and it was a very small place. There was only one employee, and she happened to also be Canadian, and they just ran kind of horse tours for people, and the job pretty much involved just like mucking out the stalls and coming along for the rides. And so when I went there looking for a job, the girl said, yeah, of course, like, come on, we'll try it out and see how it goes. And so I spent 2 days there. And then I called the owner of the place and I was like, hi, I'm just wondering if we can, talk about the details of this employment. I've done 2 days. I think it's great. She told me that I would probably have to volunteer for another several weeks, if not months, before they started paying me. And I could not afford to do that. So I left that position, even though it was a really cool thing, but I needed to make some money. So I found a job at this really cool cafe, which was built into the train/bus station in the main square of Galway, Ireland, which is called Ayr Square, which unfortunately was under construction the entire time that I was there. But now it's this beautiful square for being outside and relaxing and stuff. But yeah, I worked at the train and bus station cafe, and specifically I worked in the news agents, which is like the little corner store section of the cafe where people could come and buy magazines, chips, snacks, that kind of thing. And I worked in this cafe with 3 other Canadian women, and we became really good friends, and they were my best friends for the entire time that I was in Ireland. And it was the most amazing time. I remember I have this clear, vivid memory of us. We were out at a pub one night, which was like most nights, and I thought to myself, wow, like this is what happiness feels like. I feel so happy. And I think it was born of the fact that I was like having this amazing adventure, had met these amazing people, and I just was completely living in the moment. Now, I really loved working at the cafe because I got to work with my friends, but the actual work in and of itself was really tough. I've never worked a schedule that was that intense. I don't think I was working full time. I think I was probably doing like 3 or 4 days a week, but the shift, like a full day's shift at this cafe, was literally from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it was a 12-hour shift. That was kind of the norm. Or you could do a half day, which was normally 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. But I definitely could not work shifts like that in a physically demanding job anymore. I don't know how I did it. I was 18 years old and my friends and I were going out to the pub several times a week, and sometimes we'd get home really late and wake up the next morning to work a 12-hour shift. I'm in awe of my younger self and all young people who can do that kind of life, because yeah, definitely couldn't do that anymore. One story that I remember from the cafe that was, I feel like I've said in a video somewhere on this channel because I remember talking about it, but it has to do with the Claddagh ring, which is a ring that is typical from Galway, Ireland. Claddagh is an old fishing village that was once adjacent to Galway but is now like within Galway city. It's a really beautiful little village with these colorful house fronts, and that's where the Claddagh ring was created. You've probably seen it. It's the one with like 2 hands holding a heart and then a crown on the top. And I remember I was working at the cafe one day and this traveler from Idaho came by and he asked me why I didn't have a Claddagh ring, because I didn't have one on my hands. And I said, well, apparently you're supposed to have it given to you, and nobody's given me one yet, so I don't have one. And he was actually looking for one for himself, so I pointed him to some jewelry stores down the street where he could get one. And he returned about half an hour later and he was like, well, I didn't really find one for myself, but since you said it's something that needs to be given to you, here you go. And he gave me a bag with a silver Claddagh ring that had like the receipt and everything, so in case it didn't fit me, I could exchange it. And he wasn't trying to, I don't think he was trying to like go on a date with me or pick me up or anything. I think he was just being really nice. I got really awkward because I was like, nothing like that had ever happened to me before with a stranger. And I think I just really awkwardly was like, oh my God, thank you. But I have it in my little jewelry box beside my bed. and it's just such a sweet memory that I have. I also did get this tattoo, if you can see. I got this tattoo in Ireland. I actually went with one of my friends who got a maple leaf tattoo, I believe. And this is a design that I drew on a piece of receipt paper at the cafe where I worked. And then I just decided I was gonna get a tattoo. And so I always have a memory of that. It's the infinity sign with, like, it's an old tattoo, so it's kind of fuzzy now, but it's an infinity sign with a star and a moon and some squiggles. And I think I still have that little piece of receipt paper somewhere that I gave to the tattoo artist. He was like, okay. So I just wanted to say that the experience of making friends when you're a traveler, it's really different from making friends when you're living in your home city. I feel like the atmosphere is quite different, and especially in a place like Galway where there are a lot of people from different countries kind of flowing through, I've noticed that it's a lot easier to make friends because you automatically have in common the thing that you're a traveler. And again, now I realize that's a very privileged position, that we were, you know, there with our Canadian or European passports and could stay for a certain amount of time, and we had the liberty to move around. So I fully recognize that. But at the time, I just noticed there was this kind of energy amongst the traveler community, and it was just, I don't think I've ever made friends that quickly before. In general, for me, it's difficult to make friends because I like to invest a lot of time into building a relationship before I call someone my friend. But I found that those friendships developed really quickly, and by the time that I had been in Ireland for half a year, I had a really, really big and diverse friend community, and I had also had 2 romantic relationships that taught me a lot of things. And I just learned a lot about other people's cultures and respecting them and interacting with people from different parts of the world. I feel like sometimes when you're making a connection with another traveler, you are much more disposed to being vulnerable and sharing personal things, probably because you're seeking that human connection, and traveling can be a lonely experience. And I know that for the first period that I was there, I was feeling that way. So yeah, it was just really cool to have deep, meaningful connections form quickly. That was definitely the first time that had happened to me. So the really great thing was that I now had some friends to explore Ireland with. And I remember I went on a bunch of really fun expeditions with my friends. So beyond, going to the pub very regularly, we went to visit the cliffs of Moher. We walked all across town, all the way to this really cool forest once. We would get together and cook. I remember one of my friends had this really cool multi-layered dip thing that we would always make. We went to the movies together, and I remember we had a ton of weird inside jokes. And I think this is another thing that you get when you're making friends with travelers. You kind of develop your own language. You kind of frame the new place that you're in within a language that you share within your friend group. We just had all of these weird little words and sayings that we would say, and it made sense only to us. One example that I can remember, I think there were 2 pigeons that flew into the cafe once and I think I named them Broomhilda and Ra Felipe. So there was just this running pigeon joke. Pigeons with extravagant names like Broomhilda and Ra Felipe, which doesn't sound funny in and of itself, but at the time, if you imagine yourself working this really tiring job and long hours, you just find all of these things to make you laugh. So those kinds of things are really meaningful to me. Making up words, doing accents, inventing phrases, making fun of the way that each other that we all pronounced things because we were all from really different parts of Canada. So after I had been working in the cafe for a while, I decided to move houses again. So at that time, I was living in a shared house that was about a half an hour walk from the downtown core of Galway, which is where I worked. But I really wanted to be closer to work and closer to just everything that was happening downtown. So I ended up moving into a little, into a decent sized apartment that was just off of a street called Kerwin's Lane in Galway, and it's literally right in the middle of downtown. Like, it's a little tiny old street, and to get into my building you actually had to go through a gate where you had to punch in a code, and it was just like a gate in a stone wall, and you would open this arched door and then you would be inside the interior courtyard of my building. It was really cool. And I actually shared a room with a girl who also happened to be from Slovakia. And the apartment that we shared was with a Polish girl and an Italian girl and then my Slovakian roommate. And it was just a really good vibe in that house. We were all women and we all respected each other and helped each other. And I remember that building always smelling like vanilla for some reason. I remember one night after my friends and I had been at the pub, I was trying to return home, and this was during the time, I think it was the Galway races, which is a big like horse racing event, but it takes place over I think a week in the summertime, and the streets were so packed that I literally couldn't get to my house. Like, I could not, I ended up giving up and going to sleep at my friend's house because I physically could not get home. The streets were so full of people. I did have this like secret agenda of going to Ireland. I had read this book called The Hunter's Moon, and in the book there's a Canadian girl and her Irish cousin, and they go on this adventure where they sleep in this fairy mound, which is like an old burial mound, prehistoric times, and they get transported into the fairy realm. And like, I super believed that I would also do that, and I really wanted to go off on my own and like sleep in some old, burial mound and just like see what would happen. I didn't really have a plan for how I was going to do it, and I got so wrapped up in my social life that I ended up never really doing it. However, I did take time towards the end of my stay in Galway to go on a trip by myself, and I went to Killary Fjord, which I think is the only fjord in Ireland, but it's this beautiful long inlet, and there's a lot of rugged, beautiful nature out there. So I left the city behind and went completely by myself. I think I spent like 2 nights at this hostel that's tucked into the mountains, and actually I had planned to stay longer, but I ended up not being really prepared with the food that I was taking, or I didn't have like the proper attire for serious hiking. But in any case, it was really nice to it was kind of like coming full circle, because I had started off the trip being mostly alone and kind of in that state of being in the moment and feeling the place around me, and then I kind of got caught up in my social life and exploring all of that, which was great. But it was really nice to then come back to that place of solitude towards the end of the trip. And so I remember just every day that I was out there, I would either like climb up a mountain or just go for a really long walk, and I would be listening to my Discman and like all my emotional music and kind of just experiencing the beauty around me. I have good memories of that place. So that was really cool. So no, I didn't find a portal into the fairy realm, but I did have a lot of moments of true spiritual connection and feeling like I was really there, which is kind of why I think it feels a little bit like my home. I really established a connection, like a deep connection there. So I feel like it's always a place that will welcome me and that I can return to. And I've actually been back to Ireland. I was back there in 2019 with my husband, and I was showing him around Galway. We went to visit, and one of my friends that I met back when I was 18 still lives there and has a family, and we saw each other again, and it was It was wonderful. It looks so similar. It looks almost the same as when I was there when I was 18, especially the downtown. It's like this beautiful old town that is just full of life and shops and restaurants and music. And you know, there's a lot of cities that I've been to that do have a river running through them. That's not really an unusual thing, especially I think in Europe. But Galway feels different, and I think it's because the river is like a big river, and sometimes it's flowing. Like there are points where it's really a river, you know, like the water's really bubbling and like flowing quickly. And I think that energy kind of imbues the city. Like I picture Galway always as this very lively place, and the river kind of rushing to meet the ocean as part of the city, I think definitely adds to that feeling. What I really love about Galway is that there's buskers, like playing music all the time. Rain, shine, doesn't matter. You will hear music in the streets. And there's just so much art and culture and festivals, and I really love Galway. If I were rich and I had the capacity to buy multiple homes, I would definitely have a place in Galway that I could go to anytime I wanted. It was amazing. But at the end of the half a year that I was there, most of my friends were going back because they were all Canadian. They were going back to Canada or moving on to the next place where they wanted to go. And I had deferred acceptance to university for a year in order to go to Ireland. And so I was just feeling a lot of pressure, that kind of thinking process where if I don't go to university now, I maybe never will. And as somebody who's always been very like academically inclined, I just didn't want to pass up the opportunity to have an education, especially because I had gotten some scholarships and I just didn't want to waste them. So I ended up coming back to Vancouver, and which is where I was raised, and I went to university. I did 1 year. I lasted 1 year at university before I wanted to move again, but I did come back and do a year of university, undeclared major, and living with my parents, busing an hour and a half to school every day. And I very quickly just realized that university life was very difficult for me, mental health and emotionally wise. I never really felt like super comfortable in the academic realm, not in terms of the work or the actual like classes part of it, but more like the social and pressure side of things. But anyway, 1 year. And all I studied pretty much was languages. Languages have always been very, not easy, but I think super interesting for me. And so I just don't mind spending time to learn them. And I also have, I think, like a natural proclivity for learning languages because I did have to learn a language when I was very young. So English is not my first language. I actually moved from Slovakia when I was 5. So I was born speaking Slovak and then had to learn English just being thrown into school pretty much. And I think maybe that's just given me kind of like a little bit of a head start, or just natural okayness with learning new languages. So during that first year of university, I studied Spanish, German, and French. And after that year, I decided I was gonna move to Spain. When I was in Ireland, I had met some Spanish friends and I really enjoyed like socially interacting with them. And so that came up in my mind while I was in university, and I said, you know what? I am gonna go to Spain next year and I'm gonna teach English. And I'm gonna leave it there, and we'll continue this story time in a future video. Let me know if you had any similar experiences, if you've lived in different countries and what that was like for you, and what that inspired in you and lessons that you learned. Let me know in the comments below. I would really love to hear about other people's experiences that are similar to mine. I don't really meet that many people who have done like that much moving back and forth as I have. But even if you've done only a little bit, I still want to hear about it. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. It really, really supports a small channel when people subscribe. And I'm also super open to making videos about topics that might be interesting for you guys, so let me know. And yeah, I hope to see you in a future video. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.